So we've learned a lot about what type of features a CPU has, but by now you're probably wondering what that whole alphabet soup of letters and numbers alongside a CPU's name actually means. And understanding the nomenclature of CPU models will actually ensure that you make a wise choice when the time comes in either choosing your CPU or a CPU for a client. So in this video, we're going to learn about the different generations and their corresponding CPU architecture so that we can make the best decision possible. So let's go ahead and pull up a couple modern examples of CPUs. And we have the AMD Ryzen 9 5950X as well as the Intel Core i9 12900K. Does that make sense to you at all? Probably not. Probably because, like me when I first started, you don't understand all the different nomenclatures of the CPU. So let's dig into that a little bit. First thing you're going to notice on these two CPU names here, and again, we're bringing back those same two CPUs that we just displayed in the last image. And now what we're going to do is highlight as we go every single component of this CPU name so that you can understand what each one means or what it directly relates to. Now the first one's pretty obvious, the brand, right? In today's day and age, you've pretty much got two choices. You've got Intel and you've got AMD. And those are right here at the start of our CPU name. Now as we move in actually into what's called the tier of the CPU, and the tiers are actually a really good indicator of performance. So typically the higher tier you see, for instance an i9, is a more powerful CPU than, say, an i7 or an i5, right? So the higher the tier, the better indicator of performance. Next, if we take a look at this number 12900K in the Intel side and the 5900X on the AMD side, we'll notice that first number is actually the generation. And the generation gives us a really good indication of a CPU's age. And that's actually really important because even if an older CPU and a newer CPU have the same clock speed and cores, there's going to be a lot of new technology that's included in the newer generation of CPUs than you're going to get with the older generations of CPUs. There might be things like the CPU can handle more instructions per cycle, right? Remember we talked about those hertz in the clock cycle? So it might be able to handle more instructions per cycle, or it might be able to better increase its proficiency, all sorts of different reasons, but those are included in the generation of the CPU, and again, that gives a very good indication to a CPU's age. And next we have pretty much what everybody looks at, the model. And the model actually gives us an exact idea of the performance, but within a CPU's generation itself. So for instance, if we take our AMD Ryzen 9 5900X here, the 5th generation and the 9th model of this CPU indicates to me that because it is the higher number model, it is generally one of the best performing ones within this 5th gen AMD CPU. And the final one we have to point out here are the suffixes, and they're the little letters you'll notice off to the side. Previously, like back in the old days, they used to reference things like multi-threading, right? When we used to be able to do parallel computing on the same tasks. That all went away with multi-cores, so we don't really differentiate those types of CPUs anymore. However, there are a couple other things that we do differentiate with. Specifically, on the Intel side, you'll notice the K. K in this instance refers to the fact that this CPU is completely unlocked. That means it has no speed limiter. You can go into the BIOS, you can increase the voltage, and you can go as fast as this thing can possibly go, which we call overclocking. There's also other acronyms or suffixes on there like F, which on the Intel chips means that there's no integrated graphics at all, which is really useful if you're building a PC because you know you can cut corners and save a little bit of money if you're going to be adding on a dedicated graphics card later. On the AMD side, the X here in the suffix actually refers to the fact that the base clock speed is tuned higher out of the box. So essentially this X, if you see that on an AMD chip, just basically means that it comes slightly overclocked straight out of the box, and there's not much you have to do to overclock that chip. There's also another one you're going to notice with AMD, and it's similar to the F, but it's the G. And AMD has no GPU by default, so G denotes on an AMD CPU with integrated graphics. Now let's take a look at a site where we can examine some of those CPU features and intricacies from the modern age CPU. And if we take a look over here at the site, we can see that this site gives us not only the actual generation of the processor, but shows us a lot of information too, like the L1 and L2 cache, how many different cores they completely support on both the desktop and the mobile side, how fast they can actually go unclocked, how much RAM they support, all sorts of stuff. So if you're ever curious about what generations preceded the CPU that you currently have, you can always go online and take a look at one of these sites. By the way, all of these sites that I go over will be included in your resources off to the side, so don't be afraid to click in there and find it yourself.